minute. Correct me if I'm wrong here. I thought the primary focus in the WNBA was protesting and activism. I know they do an unbelievably bad job pretending to be basketball players, but I've always been under the impression that the pretend basketball was secondary in the WNBA Dump. If you have ever put yourself through the torture of watching a WNBA game, doesn't take you long to figure out that practice seems to be voluntary. These so-called elite athletes struggle to inbound the ball. I once saw a WNBA player attempt a free throw, and somehow the ball went backwards. The beautiful face of Angel Reese is constantly covered in bruises from the miniature ball bouncing off her face after one of her patented helicopter layups bounces off the bottom of the backboard. I've just always thought the basketball was secondary in the WNBA to the primary focus of this dump of a league, the real focus, which is protesting and activism. Talent isn't an adjective that I normally use when describing WNBA players, but they are extremely talented in the world of make-believe. They pretend to play basketball and they pretend to be activists, which is why I was incredibly confused last night when I did not see a single protest in the WNBA. Not only was there not a protest, I don't think they even acknowledged the unavoidable tragedy that happened to one of their own. 13 years ago, LeBron James and Dwayne Wade, they organized a team photo with their teammates in Miami to protest the death of Trayvon Martin. As you can see here, LeBron captioned the photo with lovely hashtags. "We want justice. Hoodies are for everyone. I'm tired of being stereotyped." To my knowledge, this peaceful protest occurred before Dwayne Wade's son made the courageous decision to become his daughter. But up until that point, the NBA was a league that was primarily focused on professional basketball. During shoot-around, players would be warming up practicing shots, instead of stretching their knees preparing to kneel for the national anthem. 2 years later, LeBron James once again protested before an NBA game. He was expressing his outrage over the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. I'm sure you guys remember those peaceful protests in the summer of 2014. "Hands up! Don't shoot! I need to get my loot!" Over the course of 8 years, LeBron James slowly infected the NBA with the plague of mythical racism. Summer of 2020, NBA players were kneeling for the national anthem. If I remember correctly, and I might be wrong about this, but I want to say that some playoff games, or maybe they were regular season games in the bubble in Orlando, they were postponed so NBA players could grieve. "I don't know why I'm crying. I just know I don't feel like playing basketball today. I need rest." These constant protests were devastating for business. During the summer of 2020, when subjects living in woke cities were confined to their homes under the illusion that it would protect them from germs, people had nothing to do but watch TV. But they weren't watching the NBA because no one was tuning into an NBA game to see multi-millionaire athletes whining over created racism. But the protests in the NBA, these protests were minor league when compared to the professional protest in the WNBA Dump. This toxic dump protest for everything. Several years ago, Bob Greiner demanded that the national anthem be removed from WNBA games. "It's just too painful. How am I supposed to pretend to play basketball when I'm subjected to those painful lyrics?" If WNBA players can't find something to complain about, They'll make shit up. So I'm struggling to understand why WNBA players exercised their right to remain silent last night. I'm struggling to understand why a league dedicated to protesting refused to grasp the opportunity to bring awareness to something that actually matters. To make matters worse, they refused to bring awareness to a cause that directly affected one of their own. Make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at KC_BTL84. Link to the second channel in the description below. Today on the second channel, going to be talking about the ongoing quarterback curse in Cleveland. Shedeur Sanders was injured in practice yesterday, unlikely to play on Saturday, and more than likely, he could miss the rest of training camp and the preseason. This is a very unforgiving league. This is an opportunity now for Ken Pickett or Dylan Gabriel to take Shedeur Sanders' spot. A condensed version of the video will be available on TikTok. If you want to support, the link to TikTok is in the description below. I would appreciate it if you subscribed. Last weekend, a lovely, innocent woman named Darcy Brunner lost her life in a car accident in Illinois. Darcy Brunner was driving down the road, minding her own business, when another car coming from the opposite direction swerved into her lane and collided with her. The driver of the other vehicle was a 30-year-old man named Rolando Aiko Chock. Unfortunately, Rolando lost his life as well. Now, that alone is tragic enough, but the situation was made worse when it was revealed that Rolando Chock was driving under the influence. Apparently, he had an affinity for the booze. This was not his first time driving drunk. He's been arrested multiple times for driving under the influence. Darcy Brunner was the mother of Sophie Brunner. Back in 2017, after playing 4 years at Arizona State, Sophie Brunner went undrafted in the WNBA draft, which most people would consider a blessing. All kidding aside, though, even though she was undrafted, Sophie Brunner was eventually signed by the Phoenix Masculines. She ended up making the team, and she was eventually traded to the San Antonio Stars. KC, what the hell's the San Antonio Stars? I'm looking at the current teams in the WNBA. I don't see the Stars. Yeah. That's a common perception when people look at the WNBA. Most people look at this league and they never see any stars. The San Antonio Stars are one of many teams that eventually went out of business. They were tired of losing money, I guess. They decided there was no way to monetize this turd. So they went out of business and eventually became the Las Vegas Anonymous Faces. Ironically enough, when the people of Las Vegas watch this team, they don't see any stars either. Even though Sophie Brunner only played 4 minutes in her WNBA career, she is still a former WNBA player. This is supposed to be a sisterhood, right? I thought the WNBA was all about girl power. We support each other. With that being the case, how come there were no protests last night at WNBA games? How come WNBA players weren't wearing t-shirts saying players against influence driving? This actually would have been brilliant. They could have supported Sophie Brunner and the tragic loss of her mother at the hands of someone who shouldn't have been on the road to begin with. And the acronym for players against influence driving is PAID, which is what WNBA players are trying to be. So why weren't WNBA players bringing awareness and supporting Sophie Brunner last night? I wonder if it had anything to do with the fact that Rolando Aiko Chock was here illegally. 4 years ago, he left his hut in Guatemala and swam across the Rio Grande to get into the United States. He was released into the country by border agents who, I imagine, were following orders from our former fearless leader, Johnny B. Biden. He was given a court date of September 2026. You mean to tell me he was released into the country and told to come to court 5 years later? What kind of sense does that make? He damn sure isn't coming to court now because he's no longer with us. And he took the life of an innocent woman with him. Where is the outrage? Where are the protests in the WNBA? Well, Casey, maybe WNBA players don't remember Sophie Brunner. She only played 4 minutes her entire career in the league. Yeah. To be fair to WNBA players, that is true. But that's never stopped WNBA players from protesting before. You know how many minutes George Floyd played in the WNBA? 0. Yet for some reason, the WNBA chose to honor George Floyd earlier this season, 5 years after his passing. Watch it for yourself.
Thank you guys for taking a minute to honor the life of George Floyd. George was a father, a brother, and a son. And his life, like every life, held meaning. His death exposed the holes that are still in our justice and criminal institutions today. And his 5-year anniversary reminds us that we must continue the fight against criminal, racial, and social injustices. We cannot stay silent. Every life deserves respect and dignity.
So we're still honoring George Floyd 5 years later. The WNBA is having moments of silence for him. The WNBA is treating George like a hero. But when a former WNBA player loses her innocent mother at the hands of a drunk driver who was here illegally, there's no moment of silence in the WNBA. The only silence is coming from the voices of players who are suddenly choosing to exercise their right to remain silent. I wonder why. In fairness to WNBA players, maybe they brought awareness to this at some of the games last night. Maybe there was a moment of silence. Maybe they'd said something on social media. I couldn't find it. I couldn't find a single shred of evidence that anyone in the WNBA even acknowledged this situation, the tragic loss of Sophie Brunner's mother. If I had to guess, this is probably the first time most of you guys are hearing about this. If I didn't bring this to your attention, you probably would never know about it. Why? The silence is not only deafening in the WNBA, it's also complete silence throughout the mainstream media. Nothing from ESPN. Not a single mention from USA Today, the Washington Post, the New York Times. Let me ask you something. If Sophie Brunner was a black woman and this tragic accident with her mother involved a 30-year-old white male who was driving under the influence, what would the reaction be? How would WNBA players react? Would the mainstream media cover the story? You tell me. Sound off in the comments below. I'll see you guys later.